In recent days, the lens of Israeli officials has zeroed in on the intricate connection between Ankara and Gaza's governing mix. And one question now stands out. Will Turkish forces play a role in Gaza under the US-brokered peace plan, or will the door remain firmly shut? Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has positioned his country as a key interlocutor in the Gaza ceasefire architecture. He confirmed that US President Donald Trump personally requested that Ankara reach out to Hamas to gain its acceptance of the deal. Erdogan said he specifically requested that we speak to Hamas and convince them. That disclosure underscored Turkey's ambition to convert its centuries-old regional legacy into a central diplomatic role in resolving one of the Middle East's most intractable conflicts. At the same time, Israel's Foreign Minister, Gideon declared in Budapest that while Ankara may offer support for Gaza's reconstruction, the deployment of Turkish troops inside the enclave will not be authorized. He said, Turkey, led by Erdogan, led a hostile approach against Israel. So it is not reasonable for us to let their armed forces enter the Gaza Strip. We will not agree to that, and we said it to our American friends. This clash of visions between Turkish ambition and Israeli red lines now frames the next stage of the 2025 Gaza peace process. In late September 2025, President Trump announced a multilateral 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza and pave the way for post-conflict governance and reconstruction. The immediate objective: a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, the release of hostages, an opening of humanitarian access, and the withdrawal of significant Israeli military presence from Gaza. Erdogan praised the deal as a breakthrough. He wrote on social media, "I extend my heartfelt thanks, particularly to US President Mr. Trump, for demonstrating the necessary political will." Turkey signed on as a guarantor of the deal, one of a constellation of regional actors, including Egypt and Qatar. In this context, Turkey's role shifted rapidly. What was once an awkward connection for Washington, Ankara's ties to Hamas, is now a piece of leverage. A Reuters analysis puts it plainly. Turkey's ties to Hamas, once a liability in Washington, have turned into a geopolitical asset. Ankara persuaded Hamas to accept, or at least to agree in principle, to the US blueprint. According to sources, Erdogan's messaging to Hamas was unequivocal. Time had come to accept the plan. By securing that approval, Turkey hopes to reap dividends: greater diplomatic influence, improved relations with Washington, and lift of some long-standing obstacles, including sanctions and the stalled F-35 fighter jet deal with the US. From Ankara's vantage point, this is a moment of opportunity. Turkey hopes to reclaim a leadership role in the Sunni Arab world, drawing on its Ottoman-era legacy, leveraging its military capabilities and diplomatic networks. Istanbul argues that its role as mediator is indispensable. A recent Haaretz commentary put it this way: Turkey's road to Middle East hegemony runs through Gaza. President Erdogan has been vocal. He has accused Israel of genocide in Gaza, called for swift humanitarian aid flows, and advocated for full Palestinian sovereignty. For him, the ceasefire deal is both a political win and an opening to re-anchor Turkey's regional standing. But Israel's leadership remains deeply wary of Turkish influence. Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition is sensitive to any perceived weakening of Israeli security control inside Gaza. The idea that Turkish troops might operate on the ground, even under a multinational umbrella, triggered firm opposition. Israeli officials argue that any contributing force must be impartial, and they view Ankara's continuing ties to Hamas and critiques of Israel as disqualifying. As one Israeli diplomat put it, Israel will determine which forces are unacceptable to us in the stabilization architecture. A key pillar of the 20-point plan is the formation of a multinational international stabilization force, ISF, that will operate inside Gaza. Its mandate: support a vetted Palestinian police force, oversee the ceasefire, train local security personnel, and ensure a smooth transition to reconstruction. Eligible contributors reportedly include Egypt, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and originally Turkey. Yet Israel's rejection of Turkish troop deployment means Ankara's role may be limited to humanitarian or monitoring tasks rather than taking boots on the ground. In practical terms, that means Turkey may still provide civilian support, logistical assistance, or humanitarian aid, but will not be a troop contributor unless Israel's objections are waived. Why does this matter so much? First, Gaza is a vital strategic terrain. The war has devastated the enclave, led to massive humanitarian suffering and threatened regional stability. How it is governed after hostilities is not just a local issue. It touches on Israeli security, Palestinian statehood aspirations, and the wider dynamics of Arab-Turkish competition. Second, Turkey's involvement is both symbolic and substantive. Ankara seeks to restore post-Ottoman regional influence, projecting its military and diplomatic muscle into a landscape long dominated by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf powers. That shift is unsettling to some of Turkey's regional rivals. Third, Israel's insistence on controlling which actors operate in Gaza is itself a reflection of defense and demographic anxieties. Allowing a country with past contacts to Hamas to deploy troops would be politically difficult for a government whose domestic base is always sensitive to the security threat from Gaza. Finally, the US is trying to thread a needle, leading a peace process, getting Arab and Muslim state partners on board, delivering a ceasefire and reconstruction, but also reassuring Israel on its security needs. Turkey's role complicates that balancing act. Some US officials emphasize the need for any contributing force to be made up of countries that Israel's comfortable with. In the short term, attention centers on the implementation of the first phase of the deal: hostage release, Israeli troop withdrawal from designated zones, reopening of crossings, and escalation of humanitarian aid. Global leaders welcomed the agreement. In the medium term, however, the question becomes who secures Gaza, who trains the local police, who rebuilds infrastructure, and under what political framework? These questions underpin Ankara's push for a substantive role and Israel's resistance to any deployment that could undermine its security prerogatives. Turkey will likely still seek to play a visible role. Its lessons from the past, its ties to Hamas allowed it entree. Now those links give it leverage, but it must navigate Israeli objections and US concerns. Analysts say that Turkey could convert this into gains on multiple fronts, from sanctions relief to arms procurement, if it plays its cards well. Israel, meanwhile, must decide how rigid to be. If Turkey is excluded entirely, it could provoke diplomatic backlash from Ankara and its regional partners. But if Turkey is allowed a limited role, Israel may insist on strict rules of engagement, oversight, and perhaps contribution caps. For the Palestinian side, especially Gaza's civilian population, the choices made now are practical and urgent. Will aid flow? Will security return? Will reconstruction proceed? The involvement or exclusion of a major regional player like Turkey may shape the pace and nature of the transition. Key quotes President Erdogan: "We have been in contact with Hamas throughout this process. We are in contact with them now too." Israeli Foreign Minister Sa'ar: "Countries that want or are ready to send armed forces should be at least fair to Israel." Erdogan on Israel: "Through sanctions and halting arms sales, Israel must be forced to keep its promises. As the ceasefire holds and reconstruction discussions get underway, the question of Turkey's role is not simply about boots on the ground. It is about influence, legitimacy, and how the next chapter of Gaza's future is written. Ankara has the ambition, Israel has the veto, Washington has the plan. What emerges may define the shape of the region's post-war architecture and the balance of power among key regional actors."